Before we begin today's story, take a moment to subscribe if you enjoy emotionally driven stories that linger long after the video ends. These aren't loud or rushed. They settle quietly into your heart. And if you stay until the end, you might find yourself thinking about this one longer than you expect. Hello everyone, my name is Nora, and today I want to share a chapter of my life that shaped who I became. When I was 18, I lived with my family in a beautiful city in Italy. From the outside, it looked like we had everything. My father was a successful businessman, always dressed sharply, always confident. My mother was an interior designer with an eye for beauty in the smallest details. Our home was elegant, warm, and always filled with light. But what truly made it special were my two older brothers, Joseph and Anthony. They were twins, only 2 years older than me, but growing up they felt like giants in my world. Not because they were strict or overbearing, but because they were protective in the gentlest way. I was their little princess, a nickname they never let me forget. I could go to them about anything. If I felt insecure about my appearance, Anthony would sit with me and remind me of my strengths. If I didn't know what to wear to a school event, Joseph would stand in my doorway, arms crossed, pretending to be a fashion expert while secretly making sure I felt confident before stepping out. It wasn't dramatic love. It was steady love. Evenings were my favorite. We would all gather in the living room, sometimes watching movies, sometimes playing board games, sometimes just talking. I loved sitting between them on the couch, listening to their jokes, feeling safe without even realizing it. At 18, I thought this kind of closeness was normal. I didn't know yet how rare it was. What I didn't understand back then was that they weren't just being brothers. They were quietly teaching me something. About respect, about boundaries, about how love should feel. And that lesson would matter more than I ever imagined. At 18, I believed our world would always stay the same. But life rarely asks for permission before it changes. That year, small things began to shift. Joseph started talking about moving abroad for work. Anthony was finishing university and spending more time outside the house. Their schedules grew busier. Dinners together became less frequent. Movie nights were postponed more often than they happened. No one argued. No one fought. It was quieter than that. It was simply distance. I didn't notice it all at once. It crept in slowly. A missed conversation here. A closed bedroom door there. A laugh I heard from the hallway that didn't include me. For the first time, I felt something unfamiliar inside our home. Uncertainty. One evening, I walked into the living room expecting the usual routine. The couch felt bigger. The silence heavier. Joseph had stayed late at work. Anthony had gone out with friends. I sat there alone, staring at the television without really watching it. That's when it hit me. They weren't leaving me emotionally. They were just growing. And so was I. But growth doesn't always feel exciting. Sometimes it feels like loss before it feels like progress. A few days later, Joseph knocked on my bedroom door. He sat beside me and said gently, "You know we're not going anywhere, right?" I laughed it off, pretending I hadn't been overthinking everything. But he had noticed. They always noticed. Anthony joined us later that night. We talked for hours, not about anything dramatic, just about life, adulthood, and the changes that were coming whether we were ready or not. That conversation stayed with me, because that was the first time I understood something important. Love doesn't disappear when life changes. It just changes shape. And sometimes, learning to accept that is part of growing up. Not long after that conversation, the change we had only talked about quietly became real. Joseph got the job offer. It was overseas. A position he had worked toward for years. The kind of opportunity you don't turn down. I remember the night he told us. We were all sitting at the dining table. My father looked proud. My mother tried to smile through the shock. Anthony congratulated him immediately. And I froze. I knew I was supposed to be happy for him. I was happy for him. But beneath that happiness was something heavier. Something selfish. I wasn't ready. The house suddenly felt smaller and emptier at the same time. I found myself watching him more closely after that. Memorizing the way he laughed. The way he knocked twice before entering my room. The way he'd casually rest his arm over the back of the couch during movie nights. I had always believed our bond was unshakable. But distance has a way of testing even the strongest connections. The week before he left, I avoided him more than usual. Not because I was angry, but because every conversation reminded me that time was running out. One evening, Anthony found me sitting alone in the backyard. "You're scared," he said softly. I didn't deny it. "What if everything changes?" I asked. He sat beside me and looked up at the sky. "It will," he said. "That's what life does. But change doesn't erase what we built." That sentence stayed with me. The day Joseph left, I hugged him tighter than I ever had before. Not dramatic. Not desperate. Just tight enough to say everything I didn't know how to put into words. And when the door closed behind him, the silence felt different than before. It wasn't temporary. It was the beginning of a new chapter. That was the first time I understood something that adulthood doesn't warn you about. Love doesn't protect you from change. It prepares you for it. And whether I was ready or not, I was about to learn that lesson in ways I never expected. After Joseph left, the house didn't feel broken. It just felt rearranged. Anthony and I were still there. My parents were still there. The routines continued. Dinners happened. Weekends passed. Life moved forward. But there was a subtle imbalance. Joseph had always been the steady one, the bridge between all of us. Without him, conversations felt shorter. Silences lasted longer. Anthony tried to fill the gap at first. He checked in on me more often. He'd knock on my door just to ask how my day was. He even brought back our old movie nights, insisting we keep the tradition alive. But something was different. He wasn't trying to replace Joseph. He was trying to protect me from feeling the absence too deeply. And that's when I realized something important. I had relied on my brothers more than I understood. Not in a weak way, but in a comfortable way. They had always been my safety net, emotionally steady, quietly supportive. Now that one of them was miles away, I felt exposed in a way I couldn't explain. One evening, Anthony and I ended up arguing over something small. I don't even remember what it was. Maybe dishes. Maybe noise. Maybe nothing important at all. But underneath it wasn't about dishes. It was about adjustment. It was about me learning that I couldn't depend on them in the same way forever. Later that night, he knocked on my door. "You're not losing us," he said gently. "You're just growing." That word again. Growing. It sounded inspiring in theory. In reality, it felt uncomfortable. Like being asked to step forward without knowing if the ground was steady. That was the period when I began focusing more on myself, my studies, my goals, my independence. Not because I wanted distance from my family, but because I finally understood something they had been teaching me all along. Love isn't meant to hold you still. It's meant to make you strong enough to stand on your own. Joseph called often from overseas. Anthony stayed close. Years passed. Life continued its steady rhythm, bringing new challenges, new joys, and new lessons. Joseph returned occasionally from overseas, and each time, it felt like no time had passed at all. But I noticed how we had all changed. The laughter was still there, but deeper now, richer with understanding. Anthony and I had grown closer too. Not because we had to, but because we had learned to share space differently. Our bond wasn't the same as when Joseph was here constantly, but it had evolved, matured, like us. I often thought back to those evenings in the living room when we would sit together, joking, teasing, feeling invincible in our little family world. At the time, I didn't realize how those moments were shaping me, teaching me lessons I wouldn't fully understand until later. Love, I realized, isn't just about presence. It's about consistency, support, and respect. And sometimes it's about stepping back and letting someone grow. My brothers never tried to hold me close out of control. They held me close out of care. And that taught me to value boundaries, to value myself, and to recognize love in action. Now when I think of them, I feel gratitude more than nostalgia. I'm grateful for the warmth of their protection, the patience in their guidance, and the laughter we shared. I'm grateful for the moments that challenged me, that showed me what it meant to stand on my own while still feeling loved. Our lives continue to move forward as they always do. But the lessons from my brothers remain. They remind me that family isn't only who is around you physically, it's who shapes your heart and mind, even from a distance. And that's the story I wanted to share. a story of love, growth, and the quiet power of family bonds. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more heartfelt real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes it's the small, consistent acts of love that leave the deepest mark.